So you've been able to see the campus and spend time with the students, gave a wonderful assembly to them. What are your impressions on your visit to Edmond, Oklahoma?
Exhilarating. It's a sense of community. It reminded me I the best, most satisfying job I ever did was not a job. I used to do children's TV, and then one afternoon a week I went to a home for youth I don't know how you call it in America, in need or in distress, and there I felt that we're helping people build a community, and the kids here are obviously healthy and in their right mind, but you're building a community from scratch, and it's exhilarating. You feel it in the air. People.
Yeah. There's a real positive spirit, and you talked about how attentive they were during your assembly, and that's just the way they are. They're eager to learn, and they love having special guests and love to ask questions. So that's a great...
and they're alert. As you know, you speak to crowds a lot too. You sense immediately if the crowd is attentive and intelligent or not, and then you're energized as a speaker too if you see that people are engaged.
Do you get that a fair bit? I mean, you're a teacher too at Hebrew University. I mean, I don't want you to put down your students or anything, but it is different from one lecture to the next. And what generally do you get in terms of reaction?
It's different from one class to the next. Some classes are, it depends if they come to class, if it's elective or obligatory, and some classes are just downers.
Yeah.
And then you become boring yourself. The energy just falls down. But here there's something regenerative. You feel, I don't know, it's inspiring.
Yeah. And you had mentioned, I wasn't there, I wish I would have been there, but when you drove through campus this morning, you had some of the young children from the academy that were out there to cheer you on and to wave flags.
Yeah, that was, I felt like a celebrity. And I also thought about the natural friendship between Israel and many good Americans.
Yeah.
And I think that this alliance is something fundamental, not something transitional.
Yeah.
And in this increasingly hostile world to Jews, it's very important to come and breathe some friendly air.
Yeah. Well, we consider Israel to be a dear friend. We actually have a booklet. Herbert Armstrong was the one who preceded us. He died in 1986, and we've followed in his steps religiously. And we have a booklet or a brochure that's called A Warm Friend of Israel. And he, back in the day, he was seen, arm in arm with Teddy Kollek, who was the mayor of Jerusalem.
The legendary mayor.
Yeah, the legendary mayor. And he knew a lot of the prime ministers and met with them. So, and then I mentioned over lunch that we have a lot of students participate in excavations there at the Ophel in the city of David. So we definitely, and we have an institute over there, and I was telling you about the dance program that performed there last summer. So we definitely probably do more in Israel than, besides America, we probably do more in Israel than any other nation. So,
and also, I think that the younger generation everywhere, and it's probably more so in this college because it's a self-selected crowd, but generally, if I look at my students, the younger ones are less inclined to be woke. They're fed up with this fake moralism and sense of moral superiority based on nothing at all, and all these this grandstanding and self-righteousness, which leads you to completely ridiculous moral choices. And I think the younger people are more serious. And I thought it's an Israeli thing because we have a very strong reality check. You can romanticize the other and the indigenous people of color in Palestine, but when they come and burn a family alive, that's a serious wake-up call. Mm-hmm. I heard our chief pathologist. He's the chief of the Forensic Medicine Institute, which works with the police. And he's, these people work with horrors all the time, and he's very scientific and proper. And he was interviewed, and then he explained how you know that someone was burned alive. He said, because the inside of your breathing apparatus is also burned. It means you inhaled fire. And he was talking about this scientifically, and suddenly he broke down and cried. Mm-hmm. And this is not a man who cries, he's seen a lot. But suddenly you understand the horrors that we are facing, and you realize that what Benjamin Netanyahu has said to Congress, that this is not a clash of civilizations. This is a clash between civilization and barbarism. Mm-hmm. And I think that we are engaged in a global intellectual war in which, once again, Zionism is the litmus test. Mm-hmm. Between the woke and the radical jihadist on the one hand, and the Judeo-Christian Western tradition on the other. And one version of the world interprets Zionism as the rearguard action of a retrograde, bad old colonial attitude to the world, as opposed to progressives who now accept Islam and all that. And the other interpretation says, no, Zionism is not the rearguard action of the bad old world. It is the spearhead, the front in the war of civilization against barbarism. And so the way you look at the war in Gaza actually can be extrapolated to a whole worldview, which asks, are you continuing the Judeo-Christian tradition, or are you seeing it as something that needs to be replaced? And the fault line, it's once again is your attitude to the Jews.
Yeah. So do you, in this struggle, civilization against barbarism, I've picked up some statements you've made, and you seem pretty optimistic about Benjamin Netanyahu's leadership, President Trump, and just some of the victories in the past 2 years since October 7. But that said, you've also talked about the radical Islamist infiltration into Europe, and so in that sense, it's spreading. Where do you see in this struggle? Radical Islam is expanding and growing in many respects too. Is that right?
Yeah, and the question is, when are we going to wake up? It can be, I think that early is better than late, because first of all, I don't trust Europe, and its waking up can be extremely violent. We don't want to see a version of Nazism turn on Muslims. That's not the cure. So we don't want to see, God forbid, extermination or a genocidal war on Islam. The radical forms, the jihadi Islam, the attempt to take over Europe should be stopped, and Europe should be clear in saying, if you want to live in these countries, in our countries, you need to respect our majorities. What happened? Our tradition, our rules, our laws, and our customs. So if you are going to treat women like property, you're not allowed to do that here. And we're not going to accept it in the name of tolerance or multiculturalism. And if Europe does that, then possibly it can still be saved. And also, immigrants who are committing crimes should be deported, and the welfare systems should not support people who are eligible for work and able-bodied and refuse to do it. And a lot of immigrants, you see them showing off that they are that they're not just enemies of the West, but they're going to exploit it and contribute nothing to it. So you shouldn't allow these attitudes. Some places, I think, are unable to wake up at all, because it's like their wokeness is like an autoimmune disease. it's in the name of tolerance, you accept people who pride themselves on wanting to kill you, and you are somehow, it makes you somehow feel that you are morally superior, that you're not waking up and resisting, and that your immune system is not alarmed by all this. Some places, I think, are beyond redemption. And again, the canary in the coal mine is the ability of Jews to live peacefully there. If you go to Malmö in Sweden, there's no dignified Jewish life there. If you go to Paris, I went to a bat mitzvah, daughter of a friend of mine, and there were guards outside the synagogue. And it may be coming to America if America doesn't wake up. Look, there's a memory. It's called the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, I think.
I'm familiar with that, yeah.
They compiled a report about imams in the United States, 95% of which are preaching rabid anti-Semitism. And no one is doing anything about it because it's Islamophobia.
Right.
Because one of my favorite podcasters in English is Andrew McCarthy, who has a McCarthy Report in the National Review. And he was a prosecutor in South New York, I think, and he did counterintelligence, and he was going after terrorists. And he said that Islamophobia is not a phobia. It's a term invented by the Muslim Brotherhood in order to discourage inquiry into Sharia supremacist philosophy. And I think that's true. When Ilhan Omar is calling any critique of the Somali community racist or Islamophobic or whatnot, then what she is doing is she's trying to protect racism, anti-Americanism, and misogyny, hiding behind a multicultural reverence of diversity, and it's all a lie, and it's a cynical lie. And if the United States doesn't wake up, there's a whole generation who's now going to mosques and receiving this poisonous ideology, and it won't be long before, dignified Jewish life would not be possible in New York, something we did not imagine. Yeah. But the combination of Mamdani and CARE, the advocacy group for the Muslim Brotherhood, right, and other organizations, and all this network of mosques is going to turn violence against Jews into something legitimate again. And once this takes root, it's harder to uproot it.
So you going back to what you said about Europe and its response, or what should be its response to this infiltration, not brute force to crush it, but how do you see Europe pushing back? Is it similar to what President Trump's trying to do with securing our southern border and deporting the most violent among the illegals that are here? Or is there some other solution that you see to Europe dealing with this problem?
First of all, don't turn policy into an arena where you redeem your guilty conscience about the European past. Start by that. Stop being apologetic and feeling guilty when you're treating this problem. You do not need to grovel at the feet of anti-Semites in order to prove that you are now making amends for your colonial past. And especially, it's amazing because now anti-Semitism has become a form of making amends for colonialism. Now, if you have a guilty conscience about your colonial past, you'll call Israel a colonialist state, and then you'll bash it. So the old version of anti-Semitism was colonial, and now the anti-colonialism is also a new version of anti-Semitism. So you always find a way to make the Jews your scapegoat. So if you want to treat your guilty conscience, look at your own anti-Semitism, not not your own Islamophobia. And we see this with the Germans especially. I think we chatted about this earlier in the morning. That I don't remember the name of the psychiatrist who said that the Germans will never forgive the Jews for Auschwitz, because we are their guilty conscience forever. And so the temptation to see us as Nazis towards the Palestinians is great, because it then justifies everything, right? It goes, oh, we have learned the lesson of Nazism, but you have not. And now you are the new Nazis. And one step away is, oh, shame we didn't kill you all because you are the Nazis. So you see, it's a vicious circle in which they cannot rid themselves of the suspicion that somehow they would be, that somehow the Jews are evil. And that's convenient to their conscience, because then they are not, then their sins will be cleansed once again by scapegoating us. So I remember when Sigmar Gabriel, who was for a while the foreign minister of the German state, he came to Israel on International Memorial Day for the Holocaust, and he wanted to meet with B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, two human rights organizations which actually are in the business of demonizing the IDF as racists and Nazis. And Prime Minister Netanyahu said, if you're meeting them, you're not meeting me. And he said, I'll meet them. And Netanyahu boycotted, and he did. But imagine a German minister coming to Israel on Holocaust Memorial Day in order to tell us that we are the new Nazis. And these people, B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, they're liars. The Breaking the Silence is an organization that demonizes the IDF by anonymous testimonies that you can't verify because they're anonymous. Now, allegedly, these are real because they are anonymous, because they can, because the soldiers don't fear reprisals, they'll tell you the truth. In reality, and it's been checked multiple times, they make up stories about the IDF that no one can then check. And that's financed by European and German money. And so the Germans have a whole industry working in Israel in order to show that we are the new Nazis. And that is disgusting. And Israel should be very vehement and vocal about that. And if it was up to me, then Sigmar Gabriel would not have entered the country. If you are going to meet them on Holocaust Memorial Day, then you, the German diplomat, are not entering Israel.
I'm not familiar with that diplomat. How high is he up in the...
He was the foreign minister.
Oh, wow.
So he was a very high official. And that was...
And when was this?
When was it? 2015, maybe?
Okay. What you had talked in the previous program about just the weakness in Europe and it's wokeism and all that, globalism. Are there any Israeli commentators that are in any way concerned about like a resurgent Germany? I mean, right now they're wanting to rebuild its war machine. The Atlantic had a story on that a couple weeks ago. And they're obviously seeing not just Putin as a threat, but more and more of them are seeing Donald Trump as a threat. So is there any kind of concern in Israel that, given the history, 2 world wars, that Germany, if it got a stronger leader, could become more of a menace?
I don't think so. I don't think Israelis are considered the German army a threat to the state of Israel in any way. I don't think it would work this way, but we do think that, when our alliances now are with the anti-immigration forces in the European right, and that is always a tricky business, because although some of the European right has become supportive of Israel and see the world as Benjamin Netanyahu describes it, as a war between Judeo-Christian, the Judeo-Christian tradition and Western civilization against jihadi barbarism, and so find their alliance with us. There are also those who who are ultra-nationalists, racist, and hate Jews as much as they hate Muslims. And so our alliances should be with those forces who are going to stand up to Arab and Muslim anti-Semitism with us, not against us. And Israel boycotts some of the what we call the deep right in Europe, because some of them have actual neo-Nazis in their ranks. Others have managed to cleanse their own parties. Say the Sweden Democrats, who are pariahs in Sweden itself, because they want to limit immigration, because they say the truth about Islamic jihad, but they have under Yemi Ekasen, they have cleansed their ranks from anti-Semites, and it was, I think, October 9th or something that a delegation of the Sweden Democrats came to Tel Aviv. I remember because it was pouring a torrent of rain, and I drove there on my bike and arrived completely wet at their hotel in the north of Tel Aviv. But they made a point of coming here 2 days after the disaster, after the horrendous massacre, in order to show their friendship. And I think Israel should reach out to those among the sovereigntist European right-wing parties who share our values and who have cut their ties with the anti-Semitic right. Because I was surprised by the rise of anti-Semitism on the American right, because until a few months ago, I would have said that, look, on the right there is anti-Semitism, and there are crazy nuts like Nick Fuentes, but on the left it's institutionalized.
Right.
In a university, in a department of post-colonial studies, being pro-Zionist runs against the methodology, not against some conclusion. You cannot, within their framework of methodology, you cannot make sense of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in any other way than making the Jews the oppressors and the Palestinians the indigenous people who are obviously on the side of right. So this has been institutionalized, and 40 years of Edward Said in university is now bearing its bitter fruits. And we have a whole corrupted elite that thinks about the world and the conflict in terms of a bad West which should make amends, not even amends, which should renounce its own identity in order to make amends, and we are the first to. The demand is that Jews would be the first to renounce their identity and their state, and so these people are hiding behind statements like anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. Well, anti-Zionism can be something other than anti-Semitism if, in principle, you are against nation states and you're a globalist. So if you are against the right of all peoples to self-determination, that's fine. But if you're for the right of self-determination for everyone except the Jews, then that's anti-Semitism. If you're singling out the Jews, then that's anti-Semitism. And lo and behold, every anti-Zionist you'd meet ends up being also an anti-Semite. So the congruence is apparently not accidental.
So you mentioned academia and it's how it's institutionalized these worldviews. You've been a teacher in the university for how many years?
I got my appointment at Hebrew U in 2003.
Okay, so
just
over
when
20 years.
I finished my PhD at Rutgers.
Yeah. What have you noticed just being in it, besides, as you say, the agenda to portray Israel as the one who's oppressing and the Palestinians as the victims and so on. But have you noticed over the years any other glaring flaws in modern education?
Yeah. First of all, I have a low opinion of academics. The university teaches you to advance by conformism. The whole system of peer review rewards conformism. That's one thing. And the second thing is that there are no consequences to radical ideas. You can make fiery speeches and be as radical as you want, and nothing happens, because as Roger Kimball, I think, wrote a book years ago called Tenured Radicals, which should have been a contradiction in terms. You're not a brave revolutionary if you are a tenured academic. So the institution is corrupting in its structure. It doesn't encourage innovation. It doesn't encourage a daring thinking. It encourages stifling conformity, and that's how you advance. When I entered academia, I had a lunch with a professor who was just going into retirement, and I said there are an awful lot of post-Zionists in our university, and he said, "Oh no, they're not post-Zionists." I said, "What do you mean? I read what they write." He said, "You don't understand. They are conformists. They have to publish. In American journals, Edward Said is the Vogue, so they write papers which portray Israel the way Edward Said would. And this is how they advance. And this is how academia works. There is a small core of true believers who are radical progressives. And there is a whole majority of cowards who are just conformists." And as Ben Shapiro said in the Turning Point USA convention, rightly, the problem is not just Tucker Carlson. The problem is the hordes of gutless conformists who are not willing to call him out. So our problem is not just Tucker Carlson, it's moral jellyfish like Megyn Kelly who are just trying to find favor with the audience and have no moral backbone of their own and are just, changing with the wind. And this has always been the case. This is how totalitarian states are created. Not everyone is an evil Stalinist. Most people just keep their head down and don't want to get in trouble themselves, and this is how nobody. This ends up with an atmosphere where nobody can raise the alarm without having their head chopped off.
So you say you're not a big fan, and you told the students earlier you wouldn't recommend they go to the university you went to. But you teach at Hebrew U, and looking at what you've observed, there's not a lot of positives, but besides someone sitting in a lecture that you're giving, that would be edifying. But what else in the academic environment is an actual, like a good thing or a positive thing?
Well, it's a good thing that there is an institution that pays people to think. And it's a price you pay, that most professors are mediocre because most people are mediocre. If I may quote my father again, when I went into academia, he told me the great majority of people are mediocre, and it's no different in academia. And that's true. And you can't expect everybody to be a maverick, but you need to create an environment where a maverick can survive. And it was strange because my tenure committee rejected my candidacy. And I thought that this was because I had just written a novel. And if I understand the way they're thinking, and of course, I'm very prominent in the media. And I went the opposite trajectory than they, because For a professor to be prominent in the media, you have to become an expert, many years, show your expertise. And I started on the media, and then I said, I need more basis for the work I'm trying to do. And then I went and did my PhD, but I kept publishing the whole time, and not in their journals, which they don't like. But because I think it's more important for me to write a book that the public would read than to write an article for a journal for a few specialists.
Right.
So they didn't like me, and the tenure committee voted 6-4 against me. Now, usually 6-4 for you is not enough for you to pass. You need a greater majority. So I was basically kicked out. But then the university...
this is at Hebrew U.
Yeah, this is at Hebrew U.
Yeah.
But then there was a new president at Hebrew U, and Shlomo Avineri, which is probably our most prominent, now the late Shlomo Avineri, our most prominent political scientist, went to the president and said, what kind of university would you like? Do you want a university of specialized technicians, or do you also want intellectuals who can write a novel? And the new president and the provost made an example of me for the tenure committees. And the tenure committee received a slap, because the higher committee, after your regular tenure committee, it needs to be approved by the university-wide higher committee. And the higher committee voted 8-0 for me. So I was just their battering rod. They wanted to make an example for the lower committees to say, we're not just about specialists. An interesting anecdote, Shlomo Avineri stopped talking to me. You know why? Because I interviewed Steve Bannon.
Oh, no.
I interviewed Steve Bannon for Haaretz, and he lied to me. He said he was a Christian Zionist. We see what kind of an idiot he is now. He wants a Christian state in Jerusalem. That means he doesn't understand what a Jewish state is. A Jewish state is a national state in which the Jewish people exercise their right to self-determination. What would be a Christian state in Jerusalem? Who would be the people that would exercise self-determination in the Christian state? So he's just attempting to undermine Zionism with all this. But when I interviewed him, it was shortly after he was kicked out by Trump. And I read the book about him and Trump by Josh Green, which sort of, if you read that book, you would have guessed that Trump is going to fire him, because you need to be not savvy enough in real world politics in order to go around and say that you are the brain behind your chief. No chief appreciates someone going and saying, I'm the brain behind Trump. And so that's what he did with Josh Green in that book called Devil's Bargain. It was a very scaremongering kind of book. But I thought, we don't know anything about Trumpism. That was 1817. And that was 2017 or 18. And I said, let's see what this guy is about. And I did this interview with him, and it was presented in Haaretz like I was ushered into the den of the devil, and I came back with an interview, which was ridiculous. And he said some interesting things. What I didn't say about him was that he was a racist, because I found no evidence of that. I didn't see anything that had to do with race. And by the way, nothing anti-Semitic back then. But two of my teachers disowned me. One was a partner of mine in editing a literary journal in Tel Aviv, Nissim Calderon, and one was Todd Gitlin, who is a leftist intellectual in America, who taught me in a private tutoring class, because I more or less avoided my class at Rutgers because my opinions were not enough in conformity with their political correct standards. So I did private tutoring, which you can do. And I went to Columbia to Todd Gitlin, and it was very interesting because he was president of SDS, of Students for Democratic Society, in the 60s for a brief spell, and a nice guy, by the way, but a leftist who went, there was in The Onion, which used to be funny before it went Trump derangement syndrome, total loss. They had they had a story. It said, "Liberal dies of outrage fatigue." That was Todd Gitlin in the days of George W. Bush. Imagine what would have happened if he were now alive under Trump. So Todd Gitlin and Nissim Calderon published a bilingual piece in Haaretz, in Hebrew and English, which was entitled, "Gadi Taub has no difficult questions for Steve Bannon," by which they mean I did not scream racist, because he's not. And I consider, my job, I'm a journalist and an intellectual, and my job is not to reprimand Steve Bannon. If I can bring to the audience what this man thinks, and if that says something about the Trump administration, then I'm in, and then I want to do it. And that's how I did it. But Haaretz treated it, they actually had the photographer write a piece on what it felt like to take pictures of Steve Bannon. What are you, children? This is ridiculous. And apparently, and Steve Bannon, you can see now that he's an intellectual lightweight. He didn't do his job in the first Trump administration, which was he could have explicated and explained Trump's policy to the press, which Trump doesn't do. And he could have done it in terms that were intelligible to the American educated classes. And instead, he just wanted to find favor with the liberal press. And we see where he is now.
Yeah. You mentioned that you didn't see or detect any anti-Semitism back when you interviewed him in 2018. And social media showed some clips of Tucker, I think 15, 20 years ago, where it was very strongly pro-Israel, supportive of Israel. And they're not the only ones that have just had a pretty dramatic change in their views.
Yeah.
What do you feel like? I mean, these are men that are beyond the academy, and they're in their professional careers, they're in their middle age years, they're in their 50s or 60s, whatever. How do you explain the change in their thinking on support for Israel, or even borderline or full-on anti-Semitism?
I think that they're not the same. Bannon is a half-baked semi-intellectual who is basically an opportunist. And it was opportune to support Israel at the time that he did the interview, and especially with an Israeli journalist. I read stuff he said in other places. I found nothing to contradict what he told me. And after Trump kicked him, I think they are now fighting for the next generation of MAGA. And an opportunist like Steve Bannon is thinking, well, he can't, Trump is not going to anoint him. He's not going to be handed anything by the current Trump administration. So he's thinking, how do you create for yourself support in the next generation of MAGA by challenging the current leader? It would be difficult now, but would pay off later. This is, to my understanding of what my estimate of Steve Bannon's character and plans, this is what he's doing. As for Tucker Carlson, as we chatted earlier before the program, I think you're right that that the interpretation which I held in the beginning, that it's about isolationism, and the way to promote isolationism is to say that an interventionist foreign policy it means you're being controlled or dragged by Israel into wars that we don't need. Mm-hmm. It's an easy way to explain to your public why America is making a mistake when it goes to these wars. And I thought that isolationism was the goal and anti-Semitism was the means. I also had a conversation with James Lindsay, who wrote Cynical Theories and whom I admire. He's a great guy and a great critic of wokeness. And also I think he coined the term the woke right. And this was the explanation back then. But I think you're right, Stephen, that now this anti-Semitism is so obsessive that it no longer seems like something instrumental alone. And it's driving him away further and further from the original America First philosophy. Because if you end up supporting America's enemies, so how is this America First? How is supporting Iran, who chants death to America, how is that America First? And I think that this is just another manifestation of what I've been talking about to your students, that once you cross the line into anti-Semitism, you end up with anti-Americanism, anti-Westernism, and undermining the Judeo-Christian tradition. And now I hear Tucker Carlson bad-mouthing the Old Testament. How surprising is that? That you start with anti-Semitism and you undermine the basic text which you and I and your students and the whole of the West, the whole of the Christian and Jewish West share as the foundational text of our civilization. So you start by dabbling in anti-Semitism and you drift away from the foundations of your own civilization.
It's a slippery slope for sure.
Yeah.
Going back to education, there's obviously a lot of problems with it, modern education. If you were sitting down with a group of 18-year-olds, they're just coming out of high school, and you're giving them some guidance, counsel on here's how you get a true education. This is what I would recommend. What would you say, maybe take a few classes in this and be motivated or ambitious enough to pursue this in your personal reading and studies, and then get some practical application in on the job or with someone that could kind of be a mentor? What advice would you give to a young person in this age of education, which has so many flaws?
I'll take this from an angle which I think will surprise you. I teach screenwriting. And one of the first things I say to my students in a screenwriting class is don't be moralistic. You start by being moralistic, you end up being immoral. And also you'll kill the story. So first of all, don't be seduced by self-righteousness. If you want to critique what is going on now, look at Hollywood. They've completely killed the stories because they want every story to correct the reality. And once you go postmodern and you think that the world is a text, you can no longer write, because you can no longer experiment in thought and fantasy, because everything you do becomes legislative. If you are writing a bad Arab character, you are promoting racism in the world. So you can't say the truth, because your text is not in the school of social construction. You are hereby creating stereotypes against Arabs. So once you go down that road, you will not be able to see reality, because you will have prohibitions on the truth. So moralism is going to be a screen that blocks your ability to look at reality. And if you are writing fiction, you should go to dangerous places. You should, because human beings are not, Joseph de Maistre, which is probably one of the darkest reactionaries, as opposed to just conservative, said, he was a critic of the French Revolution, and he once said, I don't know what is in an evil man's heart, but I know what is in the heart of a decent person, and that is frightening enough. So we should remember that we have demons, and shutting our eyes and pretending that we don't is not the way to deal with them. So I would encourage students to go to literature, and the idea that Faulkner is forbidden because he was not, he used the N-word or something, is preposterous, because you're never going to understand your own culture's most terrible steps if you don't go there with your eyes open and willingness to see things from within. So that, first of all, be courageous. It's not about, I'm not about, I don't think conservatism is about saying, look, if we all just ignore all these crazy liberals, then everything will just fall into place. No, I tell people I'm a conservative because I write about dark things. I write about dark things, and I know that it's really dangerous. It's not just fun. And if you're forbidden to write about the darkness, you will not be able to keep it in check. So that's one thing I would tell students. If you're forbidden to read Faulkner, then rebel against that and read Absalom, which is, to my mind, the greatest novel ever written. And then construct a curriculum of what is classic, because it is not called classic for nothing. It is called classic because it has stood the test of many generations. And then, I teach a sort of a survey course of political thought, and I find myself, you have to go through the gallery of central thinkers. And if you look at school curricula today, it's tilted towards liberalism so far that it's hard to get a class on Edmund Burke in there. And that's not an objective view of the controversies of Western civilization. So you need correction. And I'm not of the school who said, stop reading Michel Foucault. And when I teach Michel Foucault, who, by the way, is the most destructive of all thinkers in our age, he's the new Nietzsche. But I tell my students, look, this is a thinker I seriously disagree with and despise. However, when we're going to study Foucault now, I want you to understand why this has been so tempting to so many. So we are going to do this emphatically. And I'm going to try to turn you on to Foucault. I'm going to try and show you what is exciting about Foucault. And then we will criticize him. Same for Marx. If you just say, oh, Marxism, or this is just evil, then you don't understand the motivating force. My grandma was a Marxist. She was a pioneer. And she came from Poland. And she lived in a tent and made gravel with a hammer in the Valley of Israel in the north of the country in the 1920s. And her husband dried swamps by planting eucalyptus trees. And these were Marxist, and something tremendous moved them. By the way, she was among the founders of a kibbutz, which was so radical in its Marxism that they took God out of the Hebrew texts of the holidays. So you have the Haggadah of Pesach, which is the story about a story. It's a book about the need to tell the story of the Exodus of Egypt. The actual story is in the Bible, not there. So they took out God and they made it the celebration of spring and agriculture. And that didn't last for long. They returned to the Hebrew text after that. But if you want to teach Marxism, you have to make your students understand the temptations in order to hopefully make them immune to totalitarian ideas which end in disaster. But you don't start by saying, Marx is evil and look at how many people got killed because of socialism. You first start by showing why Marxism ignited this tremendous fire of idealism, which people pin their hopes on. So my idea of teaching is not, isolate your students for all this woke stuff going around and just have them recite the thinkers that you agree with. Have them, first of all, it's not my job as a university professor. It's not my job to create followers of Gadi Taub. It's my job to create people with independent thinking. And this is why, I enter my class and one of the first thing I say is, nobody here is allowed to start a question with the word as. As an Arab, as a woman, as this, you're here as a student.
Right.
Your feelings have nothing to do with class. I don't care. And then, I'm notorious enough to be able to tell them, and they laugh. They don't. I tell them, I'm here to offend you. If you feel you've not been offended, please come to my office hour and I'll offend you in person. And they laugh, but they know what I mean. What I mean is, I'm here to take you out of your comfort zone. I'm not here to tell you what a beautiful heart you have and how compassionate you are and I love you. It's not, I'm your teacher. I'm not your therapist. I'm your teacher. And we are going to try ideas that you are not comfortable with. Otherwise, you will not be able to think for yourself.
So if I get everything you're saying, you're a proponent more of a general liberal arts type education where you're getting a little bit of a lot of things, so that your worldview isn't just kind of trapped in this myopic, narrow-minded focus.
Yeah, but I would say that my personal favorite thinkers, I would say the first among them is probably Edmund Burke. And I would say you don't throw your tradition away, especially not in the name of traditionalism. So if you want to give your students a proper education, you have to have them literate in the tradition of the West. And that now includes studying critically those who wanted to cut the tree from under us. Mm-hmm. And so we're not going to ignore them. We are going to, or I am going to try and answer them. Yeah. I also make clear what my opinions are. And I tell them, these opinions are controversial in the university. I am the minority, but in my class, I will protect the right of everyone to voice their opinion. I will not let happen what happened to me in the United States, is that one day at Rutgers, a professor walked out on me in the middle of my speaking. I was breathless. There was a control. I'm Israeli, so I might have phrased things in a sharp way, but we read this text that I thought was ridiculous, and I explained why. I didn't shout and protest. I explained, and without saying a word, he took his papers, straightened them out, and walked out of class as I was speaking. And that was a lesson to me. I will never do it to a student, no matter what their opinions are. You can't turn a student into a persona non grata, and you have to engage students. And even if their opinions are anathema to you have other students engage and argue, not undermine, boycott, or label as a persona non grata.
If you go back far enough in the history of universities here in the United States, with the 1700s, Harvard, and some of those foundational institutions, even in Europe, the heart of Europe, going back to the 1500s, so many of the universities were, there was a place for the Bible as a foundation to that Western education. In fact, Harvard initially was like a seminary. It was to train priests for the ministry, and it's obviously changed dramatically since then. It was probably the same for Rutgers, I don't know. But how do you feel like even in modern education, that I know there isn't really much of a foundation that rests on the Bible, but do you feel like that there should be some of that?
In Israel, I think the problem starts with high school. We've had generations of progressive ministers of education who think that school is about giving you tools, not about giving you information. And the whole framing of tools and information is completely ridiculous. A school, a high school, even a primary school, is an institution of socialization. It answers the question, who am I? And how are you going to answer the question, who am I, in a Western Jewish or Christian school without the Bible? You will end up with a universal rights-bearing individual with no identity at all. And so what happened is, in Israel, there's now a whole fight, and you would not believe it, but the current Minister of Education is proud that he was able to reinstate a weekly hour, single hour of Bible in primary school. Some of the organizations in which I guess involved is a strong word, but I support them in my podcast and I promote their opinions wherever I can, had this stunt where they printed an empty Bible, and it's just the cover, and there's nothing inside, and they gave it to the graduates of the 6th grade who finished their primary school as a form of protest, because some of these kids have not opened the Bible once in 6 years. Now, I on these issues, I'm, I guess, more conservative than most, because I'm grateful to my high school literature teacher who forced us to learn by heart poems by Nathan Alterman, who is Israel's Shakespeare.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the vogue to say that if you learn by heart, you become a parrot. Instead of thinking, you just parrot other people's words. And that is ridiculous. The fact that I have learned Alterman by heart enriched my inner world. It had enlarged my vocabulary and the echo chamber of my associations. And people need texts that they know by heart. No one should have known this better than the Jews, who memorize very long texts for their daily prayers. And if you don't give kids texts that are meaningful to memorize, they will memorize commercials. Mm-hmm. Human beings cannot live without memorized text. This is how they make sense of their world. This is how they build their own ability to use language. And I was delighted to learn that you have rhetoric classes in this institution, because if the depth of your ability to think is the depth of the text that you are able to understand, and when you memorize a text, you own it. And it's completely different than just reading. Mm-hmm. It gives you, language is endlessly flexible, but it can also be a shapeless swamp of single words without ties. And if your brain is not wired to multiple associations of idioms, then your thinking becomes shallow.
Yeah. Well, you, speaking of books and memorization, you've been an accomplished writer of fiction and nonfiction, and writing is essentially thinking. And given that you have that experience, you've had it for many, many years, what would you tell our students as far as how to develop as, not even so much, there's some writers and there's plenty of other occupations where maybe you don't write as much, but everyone's going to be communicating and writing to some degree. So just preceding that skill, I mean, how would you encourage young people to develop their thinking and to become a deeper thinker? Is it mostly like reading and meditation and memorization, as you're saying? Are there other techniques or factors that you would encourage as well?
I would encourage them to write. It takes time until it's like swimming or doing any other sport. It takes time before you become proficient, but then this is the way to order your thoughts. And in the end, it's an exhilaration. Christopher Lasch, one of my favorite historians, called writing, he said, when he writes something that he believes in, he enters a state of blissful self-forgetfulness, which is right on target. When I wrote my novel, I guess it was most intense. I completely forgot myself. I forgot that I was hungry. I didn't remember I have a body. And that is an exhilarating sense. Being yourself is also a burden. The ability to formulate clear thoughts is also a way to transcend yourself. And when you feel passionately, you probably know this, when you write a text that you are proud of, it is something that I'll say it this way. if when I write something I believe in, if the thought crosses my mind that maybe my house is burning now, my next thought would be, oh, but the text is here with me. It's so when you write something you really believe in, for a while it's almost more important than yourself, and that is a great feeling, because I think radical individualism is a mistaken diagnosis of the human psyche and soul. You are only really happy when you're able to transcend yourself. And what I said about volunteering in this place for youth in danger is when you feel you're making a difference in someone else's life, that is much more rewarding than... I had a career in children's TV, so I was like half a celebrity back then. And that was more rewarding. That one girl that I helped with homework, and that I gradually see the light come back to her eyes, was much more rewarding to me than my celebrity as a children's star, having children ask for my autograph.
Right.
And you're an educator too, so you must know what I'm talking about. But this is what I sensed in your hall. People feel that they are doing something meaningful in the world, and the students feel it, and the teachers feel it, and that makes you transcend yourself. And I am convinced that people need to, that it is a personal need to transcend your personal world.
Yeah, that's awesome. One thing we do encourage the students to do when they get together for group activities, or they are at a congregation for a service or whatever, is we use the term fellowship. Some would say conversation. Obviously, with your podcasting background with Carolyn Glick or Michael Duran, and it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, because this is your profession. You're doing this all the time. But one thing that makes it so engaging is just the conversation that can go on for an hour. I mean, this one's gone on for an hour or 2 hours sometimes. What do you feel like that you've learned over the years, or experienced, or even pursued, to just become, or to develop the art of good conversation that is interesting? Because, so many people today are glued to their screens. And I guess if they're watching your podcast, you have to, look at a screen. But you know what I mean? Most people are watching the screen to just watch
scrolling.
Yeah, or they're scrolling. So what would you encourage young people to do to just become more skilled at conversing with an adult, or with a neighbor, or with whoever, and not just be so inclined to pull away and to just look at a device?
Curiosity. I think that is. I'll tell you a strange anecdote about my father again. When I was, it was in one point in my army service, I had to go to some medical exam, and my father could drive me, and he came. Israel is small, and so you're never far away. And my father was, I don't remember where he was going, and early in the morning we drove on Ben Yehuda Street in Tel Aviv, and there was this guy opening his kiosk and hanging in his newspapers like they used to do on a shade. Like he would open his shade and hang them with the laundry pins. And I said, oh, poor guy. He wakes up at 5 o'clock to do this. And my father said, how do you know that? Maybe this guy hates his wife, and he loves his hour alone drinking tea when the road is still quiet. And I was mesmerized by this, because my father was able to, first of all, not judge, then see the singularity of someone else. And I think that is the part of you that writes fiction, is your curiosity about someone else, about yourself also, but about someone else. So if you're a podcaster and you do long form interview, the conversation is engaging if you yourself are curious, and usually the audience will follow you. If you're bored and you just have a list of questions, then people will just nod off. But it's a good thing that we went off your list a few times.
We definitely have.
So then it's engaging.
Yeah.
And as for young people, I don't think you need to tell them anything. I think that given the fact that they suffer from a diet of cheap excitement all the time, they have their craving for something more fulfilling. And so who are the young people who come here? These are not people who, just wanted to, I don't know, participate in reality TV and were forced to go to your college. These are people, young people, who are here of their own choice because they felt that there was something vapid and void about the culture where they grew up. And
Right.
so we in media departments in academia have been saying, attention span is just narrowing. And it used to be a 20-second soundbite. Now it's a 5-second soundbite. Now it's a 3-second hook. Because on TikTok, if you don't have a hook in the first 3 seconds, then statistically, you'd be scrolled away. So we think that this is the way the world is going. But Joe Rogan is doing a 3-hour podcast and is the most popular podcaster in the United States. So that scrolling makes people hungry for that long form. And they will eventually find it because your soul and your brain needs food to bite into, and you can't just enjoy slapsticks.
Yeah.
But I, for one, after a long day of, writing, working, going to university, sometimes I just want to scroll some slapsticks
Right.
on TikTok before I go to sleep, because that's a need too. Sometimes you just need distraction. So
Yeah.
I don't think we need to worry about the demise of thinking, because people will need to think and they will need to feel, and this is why storytelling never dies. Hollywood can die with its preaching and nonstop grandstanding, but then people will look for other places to find a story. And for a while, they found it on TV. So when Hollywood was, becoming, preachy and superheroes, they went to see The Sopranos on TV. And if television would become that preachy, they would look for it somewhere else in books, and they will find the text that they need. What we need to do is open the doors for them into these rooms. We don't need to pull them in by their hair and force them to sit and do it. I didn't read as a child. I didn't want to read. I'm slightly dyslexic, so I read very slowly and I tell people I read vertically, not horizontally. So I read the same books over and over. I can't tell you how many times I read Damon Runyon stories or how many copies of Faulkner's Absalom I've ruined. But I didn't read until I was 20-something. And my mother tried to force me to read, and there was a ration of a page a day from these stupid children's books. And that didn't work. I cheated. I pretended to read before bed. And then I started getting interested in science fiction, which I started to read at age 14. Not a lot, but some. And then I started reading nonfiction when I was 27 or 8. And then reading became a major part of my time. And by the way, I listen to books a lot. Since I read very slowly, books that I need to go through faster, I buy audio versions
Okay.
and listen to.
What was it that inspired you when you were 27? You mentioned reading nonfiction for the first time. Was there a teacher or a friend or a book that really got you going?
Yeah, I was curious, and I wanted to study history. So I went to Tel Aviv University and I started studying history. And then from there, I began to feel, I guess I got enough of a foundation that more sophisticated texts became more meaningful. If you just dump Isaiah Berlin on a 17-year-old kid, understanding the counter-enlightenment means nothing to you if you haven't studied anything about the Enlightenment. But once you have, then that opens a door for you. And I think Isaiah Berlin, I read in fiction, I read Damon Runyon all along. And in nonfiction, Isaiah Berlin was my entrance. because he writes so well. And this was so fascinating that I began to feel that I am intellectually starved and need nutrition. And I started reading books, some of which were not that fun. But at that point, I was devouring them because I was trying to build a larger edifice. It was not about this or that book. It was about, my first nonfiction book, as I think I said, was against postmodernism. And I went through all these postmodern texts diligently because I wanted to critique them. And as you know, these are the worst texts to read. They are mind-numbing. They are endlessly repetitive. My mother, who was a latent intellectual, said that postmodernism will die of boredom. And I tell my students, after I teach them Edward Said, I tell them, I'll give you the key to every postmodern text in the world. All you need to know is this. The question that they will ask is not what is true, it is who decides what is true. And the answer is always the same. The hegemonic group will decide what is true in the service of perpetuating their hegemony. And so in this sausage machine, it doesn't matter what you put into it. On the other end, you'll have the same postmodern sausage, and it will never be anything else. And so once, complicated texts by Dietrich Spivak or all these fancy Zizek maneuvers or Derrida or all this, once you understand what they're up to, all this choreography of opaque texts, it becomes completely transparent and easy to understand. And you realize, I call it bibliographical thuggery. They're trying to, or bullying. They're trying to bully you into thinking there's something deep because you don't understand the sentence structure. So Judith Butler is not a sophisticated thinker. She's very, very simplistic, and she just obfuscates this by creating a huge rhetorical cloud that seems impenetrable and full of contradictions. But once you boil it down and understand what she's trying to say, then it's thin gruel. It's really not a lot. And you should give your students confidence not to be bullied by opaque text. Or as Richard Hofstadter, my favorite historian, once said, if you don't write clearly, it's usually because you don't think clearly.
What made you want to focus on history?
I think it's the most important topic to study because identity is perpetuated by a narrative. And look, the Jewish people have preserved Jewish identity despite being dispersed all over the world. Dispersed peoples disappear. You don't know where the Yevusim are from the Bible or where the Amalekites are because they have been dispersed or killed in the case of the Amalekites. And Jews have managed to preserve their identity despite being dispersed because of a book. Because the Haggadah of Pesach is not about, as I said, it's not about the Exodus of Egypt. It's about the need to tell the story of the Exodus of Egypt. So we sit there at the Pesach dinner, and this is the new version. This is the diaspora version that is after we were expelled from the land of Israel. We celebrate Passover in a different way. And that way is we read the Haggadah, and the central theme of the Haggadah is tell thy son. It's actually a quote from there. So long as you pass the story on to the next generation, then the people exist. And Jews are obliged to read the Bible again every year. And even if you are illiterate, you go to synagogue and you hear the Bible read. And we celebrate the end of the cycle when we reach the end of the Bible and start again. Because so long as we tell the story, the people of Israel exist and the Jewish nation exists. And so nobody knows better than us that our existence depends on telling the historical story of where we came from and how we came to be what we are. If we don't tell the story, we will just be lost.
I wish we had more time, but I just want to touch on. I'd love to get your recommendations. You've thrown a lot of titles out there already, I guess. But as I mentioned to you last night, you're probably much more read or well read than on American history than many Americans, which is pretty cool. And you talked a little bit about that in the assembly. But
most Americans don't have a PhD in American history. That's for sure.
It's an unfair comparison. You're right. But yeah, you've been here with us for a day and a half, and I've heard you multiple times, even in this interview, reference your father and just words of wisdom that he gave to you, and how he was not judgmental of other people, as you mentioned. Your father died, I guess, 11, 12 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah.
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 And you're advancing in age, and it's just unusual to see someone really talk so favorably about your relationship with your father. What was, and you mentioned too that politically he leaned to the left when you were a youth, and you sort of have gone through, I mean, I know the left back then is very different than the left today, but you had your transformation over the years politically and your worldview. But what was it about your father that you felt really impacted you or steered you in the right direction in life?
I guess my favorite quote from my father is, "Gadi, beware of do-gooders." And I guess he taught me that self-righteousness is not an exaggeration of the right. It's not it's not taking the ethical and moral to an extreme. It's a negation of right. My father, I think if I wanted to sum up his legacy, it was that decency is the center of being a good person. It's not about being a saint. It's about being decent. And that is and I think he gave me a moral compass. And it also gave me, as a writer of fiction, that often the great moralists are not so different in characterological inclination than sadists. And you think of, Savonarola in the Renaissance, someone who decided to fix the community by imposing relentless moralism on everybody. So it can be done in the name of the good as well as in the name of evil. So I guess this is what I learned from him, and it's a measure of moderation. So that's, I guess that is what I carry with me. My mother, on the other hand, was very apocalyptic, and I gained much from her too. I mean, the book I wrote against postmodernism in '97, when nobody was thinking that was a problem, was because I heard my mother's rants about the end of Western civilization when nobody understood what she was talking about. She said, "This is dangerous. This would end up with," and she was right, I think. It is a real danger. So, but my mother couldn't write because she was a perfectionist, and she never could get anything done. And my father, in a way, in his moderate way, say, "Don't write perfect books. Write good books. That's enough."
Gadi Taub, we have certainly enjoyed your visit to Edmond and our campus, and we hope you'll come back again.
Likewise, I would dearly like to come back again, Stephen. Thank you very much.
And thank you.